The best sounding masters, the best mastering engineers do very little to create a great effect. For most producers and mixing engineers, this is worlds apart from the processing they're used to doing in their session. So today I'm going to show you 3 EQ techniques you must know, and these are techniques I use as a mastering engineer. I'm going to talk to you about why I use them, identify sonic benefits to each, but before I do, don't forget to smash the like button, subscribe, tick the notification bell. While you do, here's a photo of how to get a clean mix. Actually, seriously, let's talk about cleaning up the low end of your mix. When you're mastering, sometimes you'll find the subs are just a little bit too rumbly or boomy. Now, you might be tempted to use a high pass filter to quote unquote get rid of the excess low end. But there are 2 problems there with that approach. Firstly, high pass filters introduce, even at a first order or 6 decibel per octave filter, 180 degrees of phase rotation across the filter. So what's the solution? Instead of using, let's say, a high pass filter like I have here, try using a low shelf filter. A low shelf filter will give you a smooth curve for a gradual attenuation of the low frequencies like we're seeing here, and it can really help clean up the bottom end of your mix without introducing phase rotation or killing off too much of the subs. Here in Plugin Doctor, I have 2 EQs. One with a high pass filter and another with a low shelf. The low shelf is doing -3 decibels at 80 Hertz, and we can see that reflected here in the graph. And the high pass filter, has a first order 6 decibel octave at 50 Hertz. They're attenuating roughly the same frequency, roughly the same amount of decibels at around that 80 Hertz range, which is the effect I was after. And we'll have listening examples with this as well. But if we look at the phase rotation, that top one is of the high pass filter. Huge amount of phase rotation there, whereas the low shelf, has very minimal amount of phase rotation to make that 3 decibel attenuation there, in opposition to using a high pass filter, which has a great deal of phase rotation there. So if we go back to the frequency plot, we're attenuating that frequency around 80 Hertz, which was the aim of that EQ, which I'll show you in a sound example, but the phase rotation is barely minimal, and I'm just using the normal 0 latency mode in Pro Q3. So I've level matched some examples here for us to listen to the difference between a high pass filter and a low shelf. I've got the original signal there, high pass filter at 65 Hertz, even though on the graph 50 Hertz was sort of where I plotted them to sort of be attenuating the same. It didn't feel or sound right, and feel and sound is much more important than just plotting graphs. So I've put this cut up to 65 Hertz. Then I've got the same cut at 65 Hertz, but with a linear phase mode turn on. And then finally the low shelf. These have all been level matched within 1/10 of a decibel. So let's have a listen to the effect.
Hands up to the sky, get a little bit down and a little bit high. Hands up to the sky, one. Hands up to the sky, get a little bit down and a little bit high. Hands up to the sky, one. Hands up to the sky, get a little bit down and a little bit high. Hands up to the sky, one. Hands up to the sky, get a little bit down and a little bit high. Hands up to the sky, one. Hands up to the sky, get a little bit down and a little bit high. Hands up to the sky, one.
So what I like about the low shelf, the high pass filters both effectively do the job of taming that low end. However, the high pass filters kill the extension in the subs. It just feels like everything's boxed in, whereas I'm able to control that low end using the low shelf, but those subs still extend out and they're just neutral, so it doesn't feel like they're being cut off at any point. So that is one EQ technique I'm using as a mastering engineer. I'm using low shelves more often than I'm using high pass filters, only because they don't introduce as much phase, and I can control how I want to attenuate the low end rather than just shaving or attenuating a great deal of subs in my lowest octaves. Next, let's talk about yin yang. It's a great trick to use when you want to make a boost or cut to a specific frequency, but you don't want to shift the timbre of your mix of other elements near it too far from the original balance. So instead of making a large boost or cut to any particular frequency range, try making opposing moves in different frequency regions. For example, I want to add some clarity to this track in the upper mids. Now, I can try just doing a 3 decibel boost at about 4 kilohertz, upper mids to high frequency range. However, what if instead of doing that, using a yin yang, not only do I boost 4 kilohertz, I attenuate around 250. Let's go to 250. There we go. This will give me a more natural sounding result because I'm not doing this big boost and at boosting all the elements around this region, I'm only giving it a subtle boost up there and changing the perspective of that boost by doing a little tuck down here. Now, this means my low end stays intact, my air, the very top end, stays intact, because as I bring this EQ up, more of these frequencies get boosted. Whereas, if I can stick to doing opposing moves, so a boost in the upper mids, a cut in the lower mids, I'm only doing 1.5 decibels on each instead of doing a whole 3 decibel boost here, it will sound more natural to the original timbre of the mix. How I calculate opposing frequency regions is using 1 kilohertz as a center point. So 1 kilohertz, 4 kilohertz is 2 octaves above it, so 2 kilohertz, 4 kilohertz, that's 2 octaves above, and 250 hertz, where my cut is 2 octaves below 1 kilohertz. So 1 kilohertz, 500 hertz is an octave below, 250 is below. So that's how I figure out the opposing frequency ranges. If this was 8 kilohertz, the cut would be at about 125 hertz. So that's how I do my mathematics. It sort of needs a little bit tweaking, like it just gets you in a ballpark, but it's a good way to get you in a ballpark quickly, so then this way you can tweak where this cut is and where this boost is relative to one another. And again, I've got 3 level matched examples here for you guys to take a listen to.
Hands up to the sky, get a little bit down and a little bit high. Hands up to the sky, wanna make. Hands up to the sky, get a little bit down and a little bit high. Hands up to the sky, wanna make. Hands up to the sky, get a little bit down and a little bit high. Hands up to the sky, wanna make. Down and a little bit high, 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 down.
So using this yin-yang EQ, it helps the presence of the upper mids open up without changing the balance too much. Whereas this 3 decibel boost, if we have a listen again, you can hear that snare just absolutely get a little bit too abrasive, a little bit too popping out.
Hands up to the sky, get a little bit down and a little bit high. Hands up to the sky, wanna make. Hands up to the sky, get a little bit down and a little bit high.
So that helps the tone of the mix change without necessarily warping the balance of where that snare was sitting by using this yin-yang EQ. Finally, let's talk about dynamic EQ in the upper mids or higher frequencies. When you're using a dynamic EQ in these ranges, it's important to pay attention to the attack time of the compression. Now, if you set the attack time too fast, the EQ will clamp down on the snap of percussive elements, which can make your mix sound harsh and unnatural. Try to avoid this by opening, so in a dynamic EQ on Ozone, it's got a little tab here and you can change the attack and release times of the dynamic EQ. Try slowing down the attack time. So here it's 5 milliseconds, and on the comparison, it's going to be much higher. What is it? I think it's like 100 milliseconds. 50 milliseconds. Okay, so it's much slower, okay? And this is going to give the gain reduction circuit in the dynamic EQ a little bit more time to reach its full compression and help preserve the natural punch and snap of your mix. This is actually something I learned when I was an assistant, an intern at a mastering studio, and this is something the engineer would always do, and it would make a world of difference. So let's take a listen to this. First, we'll play back the fast attack, then we'll do it with the slow attack. The slow attack will have more open transients on the snares. The fast attack will feel a little bit more clamped down.
Hands up to the sky, get a little bit down and a little bit high. Hands up to the sky, wanna make. Hands up to the sky, get a little bit down and a little bit high. Hands up to the sky, wanna make.
So there you have it, 3 EQ techniques you should know for better mastering sessions. I hope you enjoyed this. Until next time, take care.